Okay, let's call the meeting to order. Welcome to the June meeting of the Town of Newbury Human Resources Board. It is 4:03. Present are
Diane Doyle.
Mark Gleckman.
John Ferraro.
Anthony Antico.
Thank you all. Lynn Peabody should be joining us momentarily, and Chief Fisher is excused this evening. She's got a personal commitment. But even with 4, we have our quorum, so we are legal to go. And again, Lynn will join us hopefully momentarily. First order of business, to review and accept a comment on the minutes from the prior meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? Diane, thank you as always
Yes.
for getting those to us in advance. The meeting of Monday, May 22nd, everyone's had a chance to review it?
Yes.
Is there a motion to accept?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of accepting the minutes as written, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. Next item on the agenda are employee issues. I'll turn to Diane. Anything you're aware of in town hall that we should be aware of?
No employee issues that I'm aware of.
Okay, I did double check with Chief Fisher to make sure that there weren't any issues with the PD, and she's assured me that's the case. So we have no employee issues. Let's move to our next agenda item, personnel actions and job vacancies. Last month, we talked about the posting for the assistant town clerk position, which has now been filled.
I believe that's been filled temporarily.
Temporarily, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yes.
Temporarily.
We have someone that's assisting the town clerk temporarily, and I believe the posting is up to look for.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm anticipating that that's something that will get a little more active in a few weeks. Gretchen Gerard, who's the town clerk, is going on vacation.
right,
So I think the idea was to get someone in to help, a seasoned
Right.
retired town clerk. So I think when she gets back, I'm sure they'll get active with.
okay. So we're not sure how to define temporary at this point, but it's
Yeah,
not a full-time hire.
It's not a full-time
Okay.
hire.
Got it, thank you.
Yep.
The PD had a posting open for full-time emergency communications dispatcher. Do we know if anything's happened there?
So we have hired Taylor Balletto as a full-time emergency communications dispatcher. He's been an existing town of Newbury employee with both the fire department and with the police department. So he will be starting July 1st
Okay,
as a new full-time emergency communications
great,
officer.
thank you. Hey, Lynn? 2 positions have been filled within the Harbor Masters Department. That group is set for now.
Mhm.
Thank you, Diane. Anything new relative to personnel actions or job vacancies?
So the only 2 things that we have is we have the recent resignation of the IT director. He will be leaving us June, the end of this week.
That's a
So
tough
he
position.
actually is going back to Reading, I believe
North
it is,
Reading, I
North
think it is,
Reading,
yep.
okay. Which is where he came from, and he was not actively looking, but they reached out, and I think from a transportation, a commute perspective, it's better for him, and he just said that he appreciated his time here, and that he wasn't actively looking, but they kind of came in with an offer that he couldn't refuse, and so he's leaving the end of this week. And then obviously with the announcement of the fire chief who is retiring as well,
Right.
August 8th, I believe.
Right, and I know that the fire chief position is on the agenda for the select board.
Okay.
Tomorrow evening, I assume that town administrator will present to the select board her thoughts on what tools she thinks the town should use to refill that position, or to fill that position, I should say. Okay, anything else in terms of personnel actions?
No, the only thing on the IT director, we do have an independent contractor that had worked with us previously, and he's available to help us, through this transition when Matt leaves. He's someone that we've worked with in the past, so it's not like we're gonna be
Good,
without someone that can support our operations if need be, so.
okay, so to be determined how that
So
moves
that's
forward.
been posted, the IT director position has been
Okay.
posted, it was in the Daily News today, it's been up on the bulletin board, it's on the website. So we'll be looking, I'm sure Tracy's actively
Great.
looking to get that filled.
Got it, thank you.
Yep.
Any questions or comments from the board on those 2 positions? No? Okay, I'm not aware of anything in the category of workplace issues, discrimination issues, ethics issues, no employee complaints, anything of that type?
No.
Diane? No?
No.
Okay, again, according to Chief Fisher, no issues there with the PD. Chief Fisher also emailed me today indicating that from a safety standpoint, there is nothing new. She did talk, if you recall, last month about some new directives from the state that had been put in place. But since that time, nothing new that I'm aware of, either COVID-related or in general safety issues, so.
No.
Okay. Other business, org chart. Stop, start, stop, start. If you recall, last month, we had spent some time on the org chart that had been presented. It was the shell of the org chart. And as a board, we made some recommendations which went back to the town administrator in regard to some of the blocks, perhaps needing to move around, looking at chain of command. Tracy took all that under advisement, and she said that she would be playing with that shell of an org chart and getting back to us when she had an opportunity to discuss it with the IT director. And of course, shortly after that, or subsequent to that, the IT director tendered his resignation, and so as a result, I think it's safe to say that that's at a standstill for now. It is still something that Tracy has on her to-do list, which means we have it on our to-do list. But I think we'll probably just have to catch our breath here and wait for whether it's the consultant, the outside consultant will pick up the ball with that, just in terms of the technology needed to move that shell into a working fashion on the website so people can click on it, go to the various departments, things we talked about last month. So,
Yeah, I
thoughts
think
on that?
you and I had a chance to talk to Tracy, the town administrator, about the specific changes, and a lot of them she, were very points that she thought were appropriate. And I think at the end of the conversation, what we had decided was that she, again, before Matt had tendered his resignation, was that she was going to make the few tweaks, get us the final copy. We were going to at least get this piece up on the website.
Right.
And then, understandably, at that point, she said if we wanted to work with Matt to get it
Thank you for
more
correction.
interactive, we would be able to do that. So I think the goal is still to get these changes when she has some time to make the final changes and get it up on the website. And then from there, obviously it might be back on like a hold from an interactive perspective. But I think she wanted to get it. She's like, look, we've got it this far. Let's finalize the changes. Let's get it up on the website. So I think we can still do that.
Okay, I'll check with Tracy to see if she's had a chance to play with the revisions of that shell, and assuming she has, we've okayed it all. So we'll, unless anyone feels differently, once we get back to Tracy, we'll make sure it gets up on the website, the shell itself, and then figure out how interactive it's going to be.
Sounds good, it's a start.
Yeah.
Right, I think that's what we figured. Let's get it, somewhere.
And a labor of love.
I just have one question. Are you leading us to assume that he had an offer, monetary offer, that he could refuse, and that was it? I mean, he was satisfied with the job here, would have challenged it, et cetera, et cetera?
My conversations with him were, he specifically made it a point to say that he was not actively looking, that he's enjoyed his time here. It was nothing driven, nothing drove him from here to look elsewhere. It was just that they must have filled the position when he left, and maybe that didn't work out and they came back. But I also know that the commute for him, he lives somewhere up in that area, and I think maybe that's also a contributing, a small contributing factor. But he just wanted everyone to know that it was nothing from here that, drove him back. So.
And you said Reading?
I think it's Reading or
North Reading.
Okay.
Yeah, he came to us from North Reading, similar role.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's not an uncommon set of circumstances. Municipality or private industry, when somebody who's a valued employee leaves, and for whatever reason, a year or 18 months later, that same opportunity pops up, or some circumstances occur that make them want to look again, that you start with a known commodity, and obviously they did that with Matt, I guess. So yeah, that's all I know.
Okay.
Any questions on that?
He has to deal on both ends of the day with 128 for a short stretch.
Yeah, I think he lives in Tewksbury,
Tewksbury,
I think.
Well, that's a haul of
Somewhere,
495, yeah.
don't quote me on that, somewhere
Yeah.
up in that area,
Well,
so.
that's a lot of back roads to get here.
Yeah. Okay, and then the second issue we've got under other or new business is something that spoke to Tracy about briefly. She actually brought it up. And it's something that I think as a board, I'd like us to consider. If you think about our classification system, you know, the grid that we created and use all the time, I think that has stood the test of time. It serves us well. It'll continue to serve us well. But what that doesn't do is give us a sense of how the town of Newbury, in a competitive market for talent, how it compares and contrasts with towns of similar size, type, geography. And in talking to Tracy, you know, we discussed what the appropriateness would be of the HR board occasionally going to the MMA, the Mass Municipal Association data that's available. And my understanding is that you can cut it lots of different ways. So as an example, you know, we could go to that data and say, you know, show me the dozen or 15 or 20 towns in Essex County that are similar in size, type, characteristics to Newbury, population, so forth and so on, town government.
You received that chart that I sent you,
Yes.
which isolated 27 towns, and 11 of them were somewhere within 500 or 7,500.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you had everything from 67 up to 9,000.
Yeah.
And then cumbersome, but then you have to go into their website, and all that information is there. And the other thing I spotted was that there was a photograph of their town halls,
Are you referring to org chart issues?
org chart issues.
Okay, yeah.
But only specifically for people, for townships that were within a stone's throw of 7,500 citizens.
Right.
And most of them were this side of the Berkshires, interestingly.
Right.
And there were a couple in Vermont that I didn't add to the list that were similar because they had the character of husbandry and farmland as opposed to some of the more, I'd say, formal townships that match us in size but certainly not in texture. We're an unusual township with a remarkable number of our citizens carrying 4 legs, and it basically makes us different.
Well, the nice thing about the MMA data
Yeah.
is that it wouldn't require us to go to various towns, to websites, to collect all the data. The MMA collects all of this compensation data.
Yeah.
And so it's a tool that we perhaps could use periodically, you know, and we can talk as a board about what the time, you know, is it once a year, is it once every 18 months or 24 months, where you can cull that MMA data and look and see what a library director earns in these various towns, what a DPW individual earns, or any position for that matter. And the beauty of that is that, you know, you're not bound by any of that information, but it's a tool that can be used to see if in fact the town of Newbury sits where, you know, the town administration thinks it should sit relative to compensation of other similar size and type towns. So, and it's something we've never used officially as part of our, because again, we don't deal with compensation when it comes to the
Sure.
Does it deal with the
The
complexity of
process.
the positions? Again, because a rural district as opposed to a district that is cumbersome under so many levels.
Yes, you can.
High commercial content industry within the township, et cetera, et cetera. Universities, villages, and all that that implies. Do they give us that level of sophistication?
You can break it out by city versus town, by
Okay.
size,
Yeah.
by geographic location. So you have the ability to cull it however you like, but,
Yeah, that Township Explorer also gave me 12 of these.
yeah.
Shows you exactly what other towns are doing in the organization chart realm. I didn't drill any further into it as to how you execute and how you use it. Is it friendly?
Right.
I wouldn't have any earthly idea how to assess that.
Let me turn to you. Lynn, this is something that you've got lots of experience with, I know, so
I am
thoughts?
excited to be having this conversation, you know, and it takes the work away from the people, you know, in our community, right? Like who is going to go out and do all that surveying, excuse me, of data and, you know, history of these other towns and cities, and to your point, you know, what are the logistics of those, and do we compare to those, which ones do we do? I mean, this stuff, and I've used these previously, and when you are able to just pull this information and it's already accumulated and put into a package,
Right.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, again, it's a tool.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
to what degree the town administrator or the select board or we as an HR would want to use this information?
Yeah, sorry, I think it's valuable information, and however often we would want to use it. We, you know, as the HR board, we're part of the HR team, we are the HR team for the town of Newbury, right? And so this would be a good tool for us to be able to look through, and when you say what's the time frame, you know, we could see like what's changed, you know, socioeconomically. So I would say look at it once a year, you know, look at it when it makes sense to us. When does it come out? You know, I'm sure that there's a time frame when it comes out.
Right.
Does that coincide with our fiscal years, you know, when we're doing our budgeting and all of that, so that we can see, you know, oh, there really hasn't been much change, you know, cost of living is still at 2%, you know, pretty much across the state or in the regions that we're looking at for comparables. And then, you know, we can just, so some years it would be more valuable than others, like through COVID. I'm sure that that would be a very valuable tool. You know, what are entities doing through COVID to recruit and retain employees, you know, in a challenging socioeconomic time. And so, but now, you know, maybe things are evening out a little bit more, and so now we just kind of take a look at it, you know, annually without like doing a deep dive, and just, you know, if it looks kind of similar to last year, okay, great, you know, we're staying on point. You know, it's a terrific tool.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Tony, I have just a general comment that, you know, as the years have gone on, we've gone through our discussions on the job descriptions, et cetera, you know, the requirements of the job, et cetera. And I really never considered the budgetary issues behind those. But every time, you know, Diane would discuss it, et cetera, you have to find out that, well, we got to pay this person something. What is it? Isn't there or has there ever been a comparison related process where, again, the same similar towns, et cetera, this is what they're paying them? I mean, hasn't that always entered into the conversation about when you hire somebody?
So during the hiring process, so maybe what I could do is speak to two parts. So we have our classification, we go through, we determine what the rating is, we see how the rating fits within the classification schedule. So, you know, building inspector is an 18.2 or what have you, and this is the range that we could potentially pay him because this is the level of responsibility and this is the range. And so what happens is that grid, that classification schedule, based on whatever the COLA increase is for the year from a budgetary perspective that's approved at the town meeting, if it's 2%, then that classification schedule gets 2%. If it's 3%, we raise those rates, those ranges, 2 to 3%. But I think, you know, over a period of time, I think the point is that, you know, you then go out to hire a new building inspector and you find out that you can't hire someone within those ranges. And so, or you can and you can't, based on what the market is. And we know for a fact that it's a harder time to recruit people and keep people and find talented people, and some of these jobs are very specific in nature. So the candidate pool is small, so therefore you're paying more to recruit them. But on the so that's sort of the practicality of how we've moved those classification rates every year. We've never gone out and said, well, we need to adjust these rates 4% because of the market or 6% because of the market. Because I think to some degree, some of the positions still can meet those guidelines and some of them maybe don't. So on the MMA side, maybe I could just speak for a couple of minutes about how that operates and how the data gets in there and what our ability is and so forth. So the Mass Municipal Association, there are 2 people, or I think there's 1 now, that has access to the MMA data. So what I have to do every year is when we finalize those pay grades, those ranges, I have to do what's called a benchmark update. I have to put in for the town of Newbury, here's a list of all of our positions and this is what we're paying them. So every community across Massachusetts is requested to do that. So we try to get as much data into that, those pay grades or those positions as possible. So they come out as soon as we set that 2% or 3%, I go in and I enter those in for the town of Newbury across as many positions as I can. So typically by like August, you would start to have an updated salary data pool for the fiscal year that we're just starting. But we have the ability to go in and I can go back to the previous year, I can go back to the year before, and I can extrapolate 2%, 3% to get to the data. So a lot of times what will happen is when there's a new hire and Tracy's looking at, trying to retain someone, she'll ask me to pull that data as part of the process of setting the salary based on, what does the market look like? So we are using it during the hiring process, but we're not using it across the board. Does that help kind of the 2 paths that we are sort of on?
So I see that as kind of a reactive way of using the tool versus the proactive way. I think it's great if we're having this discussion, and what would it look like for us? Do we want to start putting this in our toolkit? And just having conversations and reviewing this. What are your thoughts, Diane?
I think that we have seen with some of the recent hires that, the salaries are at a bigger premium than 2 or 3% when we've had to bring in new people to fill roles. I think that maybe in addition to looking at the MMA data, I think maybe there are positions that we talked about that haven't been rated in quite a while. I can think of a few that haven't been rated in, say, 10, 12 years. Maybe the responsibilities have changed a little bit, but I think I've noticed that as we've rated certain positions recently, when I look back at ones that were rated some time ago, different folks, different market, I think there might be some disconnect. So do we go back and do a pool of positions that maybe are in excess of 10 years or in excess of 8 years, and would we then factor in this as we start to bring our data up to date in terms of market pay grades?
So,
because I know at one point we had talked about, well, if that position hasn't been rated in a period of time, should we go back and re-rate it? So I know that there are some that haven't been rated in a while because there haven't been transitions, or there haven't been, a big change in responsibilities.
And another of the challenges is that sometimes it's tough to compare the apple to the orange.
mm-hmm.
That, in some towns, the head of the DPW, for lack of a, use that as an example, the head of the DPW may have greater breadth of responsibility than the person who's the highway supervisor at another town who's the #1 individual, And so you have to be, I think, a little bit careful there. It's not an exact science. But I would think that an annual at least a cursory annual review of whether it's all positions or key positions in town, regardless of whether the position is open at that time. That's really not relevant.
Yeah.
So now, as you said, you may be a proactive, so that if 4 months later something occurs, you're ahead of the game.
Yep.
But I would think it wouldn't be a heavy lift if perhaps on an annual basis we were to dedicate, a meeting to reviewing the MMA data, and, it wouldn't be, I think, very challenging to pick a dozen towns, there's West Newbury and Georgetown and Salisbury and Merrimack and Ipswich or Essex or Groveland, and then fan out a little bit further, so that you're geographically tight to northern Essex County. There's probably enough examples there. And, we don't have to think about how we compare and contrast to somebody in Wilbraham, or in the Berkshires. And then cut it that way and look at those dozen or 24 positions that would be interesting to look at, and see where Newbury sits relative to the competition, because it is, it's a battle for talent. We're very fortunate in that, for the most part, our key folks have been in place for quite a while, notwithstanding what's happened in the last 3 or 4 months. We've had kind of a run here, but prior to that, we've been blessed with a great pool of long-term employees who've done well, and done well by the town, and so it hasn't been much of an issue. But I mean, Lynn, you can speak to the costs associated with training and development of new folks, whether it's a search you've got to do, whether it's bringing somebody on board to train and develop somebody new. And so, in a competitive market for talent, municipality or not, I think it's good to be cognizant of it and be ahead of the game.
I agree. Question, could, do conversations for this board ever become private? Like, could we do a private workshop and explore all of these things? Because, compensation is kind of a topic that is of interest, obviously, to all of us as employees and or former retired employees. But would there possibly be an opportunity to have kind of a private workshop, so that we can just really dig in and kind of explore what's there?
I'll review that. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
Executive
I mean, I don't think this is worthy of executive session.
Well,
Executive session has to be specific to certain things. I may be wrong, but I don't
like
think this would
legal,
apply.
real estate, and I think there's one other. But
We'd have to find out.
this could get to be. I mean, we could certainly dig deep.
Well, you were asking, can we and may we at the same time?
Yep.
Yeah, well, it's
Well,
that's
again,
something to explore.
Sorry.
You're right, it's a sensitive topic, and it probably needs some quiet thought.
Public domain
Yes.
information,
Yeah.
is it not?
And discussion.
It's public information. I mean, I am often requested to supply to Mass Open the Books I have to supply a list of every employee and what they made during
Sure.
the calendar year. So
Yeah,
it is
so I think
public
it's
information.
Yep.
But I understand what you're saying as far as, having a workshop to be able to understand, but it is public information. We'd be a gathering of board members. I don't know the legal answer to that question, but, I mean, I could certainly, with what you're suggesting, I could put together, I mean, you basically have to go in by position. It's not like you can just get, I want a report
Right.
of these 20 towns for every single
Right,
thing,
no,
not
you
that I'm
want to do
aware
it
of.
specific to positions,
And
right.
then, you'd have to set the parameters on what you'd want to do. Would you want to take those 12 towns and average the salaries to come up with an average salary for the 12 towns and compare it to what the position is paying here in Newbury? So you'd need some parameters on how you wanted to look at the data. But it can be done,
Yeah. I'm not sure how to answer your question, and I don't know if it's
illegal.
something that.
The violation of the open meeting law.
Right.
That's what we're talking
Well, yeah, we
about.
certainly don't.
Yeah.
We've never violated that. We don't want to stop there, but.
I'm not
But I understand
suggesting we violate the open meeting law.
Well, no, that's That's the reason we're talking.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. My guess is that it would probably be a public meeting. My best guess, but that said, I'll do homework on it.
Yeah. And it, you know, maybe even we just have a subcommittee or something, to just get started
Yeah.
on that review of MMA data. I don't know, I'm just, you know, in my job, you know, we don't generally have, you know, meetings where the public is invited. You know, obviously this is different, this is a municipality.
Right.
But even like on the college board where I was, we would have executive sessions and those, and we had small meetings prior to board meetings and we would talk about topics and things, but sometimes we would have executive sessions, you know, and this may or may not be a topic that might fall under
Yeah.
that, but I just know that it's sensitive, you know, and I wouldn't want to misspeak, you know, in a public meeting about any kind of comp issue or market data. And so that's why, you know, for me to understand what this market data is that we would be looking at, I would want to be able to, you know, really have a good discussion about it.
Yeah. All right, well, let me promise to do that homework and
Okay.
report back. I don't think it's a code red, so why don't I plan on reporting back in our next meeting in July, what homework I've done about the appropriateness of public versus other kind of meeting.
Okay.
Let's talk about this, as a group versus a subcommittee.
I think everyone's interested in it, so I don't know if the subcommittee would be something that would be appropriate.
Yeah.
You know, I think that all of us are interested in this. When is the budget cycle?
So we start working on our budgets in December.
Okay,
We have to submit the budgets to Tracy by February, and then usually by March, she's incorporating them into the town budget that gets voted on at town meeting. to be approved
Friday is the
in
last
April.
day of the fiscal year,
Yeah.
right?
So by April, when the town meeting occurs, that's where the budget is sent for approval.
okay.
And so, you know, that happens in April, and then we start filling out, you know, our personnel action forms for our new rates.
Right.
You know, it's voted whether it's 2% COLA, 3% COLA, and we start doing the rates, and then there's a transition during these 2 weeks that we're in currently, where people are finishing up at their old rate, they're starting a new rate. But it's typically starts in December, and it
Right.
concludes in April.
Mhm.
Right. And I do know that Tracy has always done a fabulous job of making sure that any decisions she's making on compensation, those decisions have to fit within the existing budget framework.
Yep.
Yeah, and so she's always very cognizant of that, making sure that it doesn't create any agita elsewhere. You know, it's not just hire this individual in isolation, you know, damn the torpedoes. She's always very careful to make sure that the budget remains intact, so, Tony?
I had a question, relative to the role of the FinCom in this. I mean, do they, or are they involved in you know, rate-setting kinds of scenarios, or that's not their job?
That's part of Tracy's job in putting together the budget,
Yeah.
to meet the
Okay.
requirements of the salary
But-
and wages.
All right, but
The only time
her
that-
the
the only-
input into her is from, I mean, this is just her job, she has to find sources to get the info?
So when it comes to the budget, it's a COLA increase of 2-3%. Typically, when she's factoring in, you know, this other data that's available is typically if she's looking, again, reactively to trying to fill the position or what have you. But no, the only time the FinCom would get involved is if there was a need for a funds transfer.
If a budget gets out
If
of
the
whack.
budget gets out
yeah.
of whack, they don't get involved in the
Yeah.
rate setting, et cetera. But
Yeah.
I had two other thoughts. One would be, I wonder if during our discussion, if there would be a place in our documents where we would publish like an average salary, whether it's with the classification schedule, if we provided like a rolling average. I mean, but keeping in mind, a lot of this is driven by the budget, so we can present the data, so do you know what I'm saying? I wonder if there's a place when we when we do start to look at this data, if there is a place where we would have a rolling average of what the current positions are paying for these 12 communities, whether it's on our classification schedule, classification schedule, here's the range, and by the way, here's what the 12 communities average paid last year for this position. So I don't know, that was another thought, and then,
Your idea is to post that for public viewing?
well, on our classification
Yeah,
schedule.
classification. Again, are salaries, forgive me for not knowing the answer, are the salaries posted anywhere on the website? Can the average citizen know what folks are earning?
They can request that, I don't believe they're published.
So
They
there
can
are some-
request the data.
There are
public
some
records
positions
request.
that our salary is identified, for example, on the town warrant at the town meeting, the town clerk's salary, because she's elected,
Yeah,
is posted. It's broken down usually by function, so it might say finance and salary wages are X, which would consist of 6 positions. So but I believe you, I don't.
but non-elected, just the traditional rank and file. Is that privacy breached?
To Diane's point, I think only to the extent that it appears, I think, on the warrant
Yeah,
for town meeting, and it may talk about a department, and one of the line items may be that departmental budget, but it may not break it down by individual.
Yeah.
But again, to what we said earlier, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that any compensation data is a matter of a public record request.
Yes.
It's as far away as a public records request. But I don't believe it's posted anywhere, nor should it be.
yeah.
In Boston, every year they publish the police department earnings over the course of that particular year. And my brother-in-law, who was a Boston policeman, was always he didn't like the idea, detail after detail after detail.
Yeah, sure.
He made more than the president most times.
Yeah, annually I do get a request from Mass Open the Books, and I have to send them a list of what everybody made during the calendar year. That usually comes sometime in February, and I have to send the list for a calendar year. Here's what every single employee in the town made, so I believe it's all public information.
That's called Mass Open the Books?
Yeah, it's a transparency group, and they request it every year.
Okay.
They must publish it somewhere, but that's an annual request that I get.
And
That makes sense, right, municipal.
To your first question now, I'm not sure about the appropriateness of including compensation data on the forms of positions we've rated. We've always been very careful to, frankly, that's not our charter. It's not our responsibility to talk about comp, but we can certainly have these discussions and present data. But, we've always been careful to leave compensation out of the equation when we use the 9 or 10 factors that we have available to us. The closest we come is, if you recall, at the end of every classification rating, we always say, is it a 1, a 2, or a 3, based in part on what does the candidate pool look like? Not the market, but the candidate pool. And if the candidate for a certain position requires 3 different certifications or certain subject matter expertise, educational or otherwise, that could severely limit the number of candidates available. And so we use that as a factor, but to me that's separate than looking at competitive comp. But I think we can have this stuff available to us, and I think your point is an excellent one. Why not be proactive with it rather than reactive?
Yep.
And always be aware, or at least annually be aware of what key positions look like across the universe of similar kinds of towns.
Yeah, how do we compete?
Yeah, and have that available.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean Newbury's going to be, that's the other part of it, is philosophically, where should Newbury be relative to its neighboring communities?
Well, and so many factors would go into that analysis. What's our budget within our whole town community? What's our population? And of course, we're trying to compare apples to apples, but what are our industries? Are they on the rise? Are they, going flat? Are they, kind of decreasing in as far as revenue and all of that? So, you know, economics is fun to look at and kind of keep in our conversation, and I think would be remiss, given this data
Right.
that is available to us, you know, to not use it.
Right.
But I want to use it in kind of the right way.
You
You know,
want
that was
to
gonna be my
learn, you want to
point.
learn
That was gonna
all
be
there
my
is to
point.
know about it.
Yeah, yeah, yep,
It's a
Yeah.
tool, but you have to become familiar with the tool.
Absolutely.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
just-
that was gonna be my point is, okay, we have this data, but then what do we do with it?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
how does it factor into the decisions that are made? How do we
Yeah,
use the data?
we study it and find out how it works and get comfortable with it before we deploy it.
Yeah, and then you make recommendations to those who are in the position to make those decisions and.
Sure,
Well, that might be worth a separate session, you're right. You
Yeah.
just sit down and drill down.
Okay, so the two questions at hand are, how do folks feel about the appropriateness of doing this annually
sure.
versus another time frame?
Yeah, just,
Sure.
unless you run into a slew of replacements or additional requirements, we need to up it to less than once a year, or more than once a year, excuse me.
So what we do.
Ad hoc, I mean,
So what we do in my professional life, my experience has been, you know, you make your budget, right? And you use these kinds of tools and you kind of forecast what are going to be hot jobs, you know, and why. You know, you look at the, like after COVID, or during COVID, you know, lab people were hot jobs, right? Because private industry wanted those lab techs, you know, as they were developing vaccines and, you know, going out to the people and giving vaccinations and things. So they were paying, you know, top dollar as well as stock options and things, these private pharma companies down in Boston versus, you know, an academic healthcare center, right, an academic medical center. And, you know, so that was a hot topic. So you make your budget, you know, with using these type of tools, but then, you know, when differences come up, like socioeconomic, like COVID, you know, then you can make some adjustments, you know, maybe you have a pool of money that, you know, if you need to make a couple of adjustments, you can before the next budget year. But, you know, if you build it into your budget, you know, and anticipate and forecast, okay, what are we gonna be looking at? Where are the hot topics? You know, IT.
Right.
Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, it seems as though, like, I have the data that we finish up we start the fiscal year, I update the chart to 2-3%, whatever the COLA is. People are starting to put in that data in August, September, so really by fall, I would have access to some significant data,
It's a good timing.
which we could do an analysis, say, in the fall, September, October. That data would then be available to present to the town administrator as she's looking at those positions and building her budget. So I could kind of conceivably see
Yeah.
that would be the time frame.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
Yeah, and you made the point earlier, Lynn, that unless some extraordinary circumstances occur, there's not gonna be that much of a variation from one year to the next.
right,
You know, the COLA perspective, but, you know, it's not like an assistant library director is gonna go from making X one year to X plus 40% the next year on average.
right.
You know, so they're gonna bump up a little bit, so you may not need to do it, you know, interspersed, just the annual may be enough. So, all right, so are we in agreement that, do we need to take a vote on this,
So
or?
are you gonna, but I thought you were gonna talk to.
I'm gonna talk to Tracy, but I mean, we can make the decision whether we wanna do this annually. Is there a motion?
I'll
well,
make the
I mean,
motion.
do it annually, and I'd add an adjunct to that and use it as an ad hoc element in the event you have a surprise requirement. Somebody leaves, or somebody needs to have, you know, plugged in an assistant, so that you need to employ this level of scrutiny, not just once a year, but when it's a necessary, necessary factor for new hire or replacement.
Yeah, there's always an opportunity to do that ad hoc, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Question, Diane, how often does this data become available?
Every year. So people, again, we finish June 30th, we get the COLA increase, and then I'm required to take that classification schedule, and for those key 20, 30
Okay.
positions, I then take their data and I put it into what's called the MMA benchmark system.
Okay,
And that's where communities all put their data in, and then that's where you would go and retrieve, well, I want these 12 positions for, you know, within this geographic location.
And would you say that that's likely to be available by September, October?
Yeah, I think that they would send out a request after the fiscal year starts for communities to start thinking about putting in their data. So
Okay.
I don't think September or October timeframe is unlikely that we would have some fairly robust data. So annually,
Okay.
no one goes in and adjusts it during the course of the year.
Okay, so to John's point then, if a hot topic came up, like mid-year, with a hire or, you know, like a resignation, the data wouldn't change.
Right.
The data's not gonna change,
Yeah.
and you're also gonna have a history of a couple of years of data.
Yep.
So you'd have 22, 23, you know, 21, 22, 23, and, you know, you kind of see the trajectory of what the growth is. So,
Right.
you know, that's typically what happens, but the data's not gonna, someone's not gonna go in and say, oh, we had to hire someone at 15% higher, so we're gonna
Yep.
change that rate. They just don't, it's an annual thing.
Yeah.
Okay, do we pay to be in this? We do?
Mhm.
Okay, how much do we pay? Do we?
It's not a significant, it's a Mass Municipal Association organization, so Tracy's a member. I believe Alicia Greco sits on one of their committees.
She does? I think so,
So it's a fairly big organization.
Okay.
I don't think the membership is very costly at all.
Okay,
I think it's a municipal, like, just like the Treasurers and Collectors Association, just like the Assessors Association.
Mhm.
You know, it cost me $50 to be a member of the Treasurer Collector position, but you have a wealth of resources available to you, so it's not a significant investment.
do they have an HR group under MMA? Do you
It's
have,
the MMHR,
do you have to be an employee to be
I believe you do.
on that committee?
I believe so, but, I mean, we can, I
It'll
forget.
certainly get you access to the information and a phone number and, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
and
mean,
the discussions too,
Yeah.
you know, yeah.
I don't know, maybe being a member of this board, you would be able to, but like, I think Alicia is on their
Yeah.
select board advisory
I
committee.
can tell you that there've been 2 or 3 occasions where I have called MMA, identified myself as a member of the HR Board of Town of Newbury, and they've always been very, it was so long ago, I don't recall the particulars that I was calling about, but I do recall they've always been responsive, get you to the right resource. If they can't get it done, they'll refer you to an outside resources, you can then decide what you want to do there, but they're very responsive.
Okay, good.
A lot of tools available.
Okay, so there's a potential motion to.
Yeah, so
okay,
is there a motion for us
to annually review the MMA data
competitive compensation data for similar size and type towns?
for certain key roles?
I would maybe leave that out, because why do we want to limit?
Okay.
You know, I mean, maybe we, in our conversation, want to limit some of our roles, but I don't think that we wanted, as a motion, that we're,
Okay.
you know, limiting it to key roles, because what's a key role today versus what's a key role next month?
Okay, yeah,
To annually review MMA data, okay.
Are you sensing from experience that this really actually applies only to a certain hierarchy?
No, I'm suggesting that to do this analysis for 50 positions or 40 positions would be very labor intensive to do.
okay.
That's all I'm saying.
My guess
And-
is that a number of positions you could relatively pool
Mhm.
together, you know, you're probably gonna end up looking at certain,
Yeah,
you know, but the point we'll take, why limit it?
Okay.
I don't know, 45 or 50 isn't a lot, I'd be like.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
we're
like,
used to dealing with hundreds of thousands,
Oh, yeah,
right?
I mean, I like-
yeah, no,
I-
I'm not diminishing 40 or 50,
I
I'm
love
like, I
statistics
just love
better
this
than
data,
anyone,
you know?
but,
Yeah,
okay.
I've got to sign those PAFs in about 2 days for everybody in town, so.
Yeah,
Okay, so there's
So we have
a,
a, well, somebody will make a motion to vote to annually review the MMA data.
So moved.
So moved.
is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of reviewing annually, say aye.
yeah.
Aye, okay. And I think, to Lynn's earlier point, I would like us all to be involved, but again, if for some reason folks think it should be a subcommittee, we could do that as well, but I think this is a worthwhile effort and
There's better synergy with all of us, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
And I think it would probably make sense to do it as, not as a subcommittee, but as a special meeting outside of the regular month, because it's gonna take long enough that we probably wanna separate the meetings.
Sure.
Is that fair?
Or an idea, yeah.
So this will give us a couple months to think through the process and start working together the data. We'll plan on doing this in sometime in the fall, early fall, September, October. Is that
Yes.
generally a good time for
Yes.
folks? Anybody away for a month or so in either of those months? Wishful thinking, I know, but
I wish.
gotta ask the question. No? Okay,
All right.
well done. Thank you for the discussion, everyone. Any other
Nope.
agenda items? Anyone else?
Thank you.
Seeing none, our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, July 24th. Is that a date that works for folks?
Yes.
Yes.
The day after my birthday, so of course I'll be expecting,
Gifts.
brownies.
Okay, John Lucy.
Touche.
Lucy, yeah.
Lucy,
Okay, that's the date that works for everyone?
yes.
Yes.
July the 24th at 4 PM.
Yes.
Great. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
A second?
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.